Welcome back. Welcome back. This is the Intelligent Developers, led by Andre Bueno and Gerard Delane. And today we have the fantastic guest, Robin Zeigler. Robin, how you doing?
I am well, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Andre, how you doing, man?
I'm doing very well. I'm super excited to, kind of jump into this conversation. I know Robin has done so much work, so many millions of square feet across the country. So to be able to kind of jump into, her trajectory, the excellent work that she's been doing, and how she's been able to create impact, it's a true pleasure to have her here. So thank you, Robin.
Thank you again. Thank you so much for thinking of me and having me. I'm honored to be here.
Fantastic. So please, let's start from the beginning.
Okay,
So you grew up in the Midwest, is that correct?
it is correct. St. Louis.
St. Louis, St.
That
Louis. So tell
314.
us, how
The
did you
314. I'm
so
shocked that you
please,
knew that.
I've watched one too many Chingy videos.
Gotcha. I can't say that I knew it from that reference, but all good.
that's funny. But please tell us, how did you get into the real estate business?
So I actually, as you know, went to Florida A&M, Rattlers in the house, and my degree was in accounting, and I majored in accounting because um, Florida A&M had two majors, business and accounting in the business school. And in choosing, I was inquiring into the two majors, and they said, well, the accounting one is harder, but it pays more. I'm like, say less. So I was an accounting major, and my first job was at Ernst& Young in Atlanta, Georgia. I was assigned to the Coca-Cola audit, which was like the signature client because they're obviously a huge company in Atlanta, and they were my only client, and I hated it. And there was a Ernst& Young Kenneth Leventhal group being started by the only female partner at Ernst& Young at the time. And she asked me if I was interested in joining. I was like, anything to get off of the Coca-Cola audit. There was racism and sexism and all kinds of things going on in that on that assignment, and I wanted out. And so she got me into the group, and it happened to be in commercial real estate. And so she said, "You're going to work in on REITs." And I was like, "Okay, great." And I hung up the phone and I looked over to my boyfriend and I was like, "What is a REIT?" And this was before Google and all of that stuff. So I had to go to Barnes and Noble to the information desk and ask for books on REITs. They had four. I read them cover to cover and started that following Monday on real estate investment trusts. And so that is how I honestly got into real estate. It was running from something more than running to something. Commercial real estate was not an industry that I had ever heard of growing up in St. Louis, Missouri. It is not something I ever thought of for my career, but so I was working in that group at Ernst& Young. One of my clients was the Yarmouth Group, which was the U.S. arm of Lend-Lease, and I went to work for them. And so that is how I got into retail because the Yarmouth Group owned and did advisory work for pension funds for retail shopping centers. And Lend-Lease had one shopping center that they owned in the United States, which was King of Prussia Mall in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. And so at the ripe age of 23, I was asset managing King of Prussia because I was one of the sole people in the US that was left when they were doing the merger with Equitable. And so that's really how I cut my teeth in not only retail, but I mean not only real estate, but retail specifically, and have been doing it ever since.
Absolutely fantastic. For those who don't know, the FAMU Business School, it's great now, but it was really, really humming at the time that Robin was
Phenomenal.
there, and built a lot of large corporate relationships,
Hmm.
and was able to place a lot of young people into these incredible opportunities at Fortune 50 companies, Fortune 100 companies around the country. So, what Robin is saying is that part of that window of time, she, as a young person in college, was able to get some exposure that she was able to build upon.
Right. Yeah, I call FAMU the SBI back in the day, the School of Business and Industry. It was like the Motown of schools, and it
Right.
really taught you professional development at its core and like what does it take to really be successful. And there were so many elements of that program that at the time I was just like, this is the stupidest thing I've ever seen. I don't know why we have to do this. And as an adult looking back, I mean, those lessons and that rigor was
Right.
it was priceless, right? And so myself and the other folks that were there at that time are all incredibly successful, and in large measure because we were put through such rigorous training in college for the business world. And that's why I attribute it to like the Motown of business schools, because it really taught you not only just the debits and credits, the pluses and minuses, but like how to succeed, how to have tenacity, and when to how to stand up for yourself, and how to speak, and how to carry yourself, and just all of these different aspects that a lot of schools just don't focus on. And in the Black community in particular, it's really important for those soft skills are just as important as the curriculum.
So Andre, while we were in the other side of the campus at the architecture school in like t-shirts and shorts, uh, the business school kids were in suits and ties and
Yeah.
dresses and like, right? Dean Mobley at the time like had them on a
He
very
did
strict
not
regimen.
play, man. And it took me years out of school. Like when we were in college, we had to wear um, blue, black, tan, or gray suits, pastel blouse. I still wear small post earrings to this day because I was trained that that's what you were supposed to wear. Hose, pumps, and I was probably out of college and working for maybe 10 years before it dawned on me I don't have to dress like this anymore. It was so ingrained in me because that was how the business school was.
I I can completely see that. I mean, I was mentioning to Gerard, my experience of going through the SEO program and getting my first opportunities on Wall Street. Like a lot of that really came from me wanting to get into the Leventhal School of Accounting at the
Mm.
University of Southern California. My first job was at PwC, and to be able to see accounting from that perspective, and then eventually move on into corporate finance and eventually real estate finance has been really fascinating. So, in thinking about your trajectory, I mean, you've worked at some of the largest companies in the U.S. You've had all these really institutional experiences. I mean, could you kind of walk through that perspective, but then kind of give us some insight as to why you decided to be an entrepreneur yourself?
Yeah, so to be honest, I was never one of these people. There's some people who have like been from the time they were 7, like they had a paper route, right? And they wanted to have their own business, and they've been planning it their whole lives. That was not me. And so literally, if you would ask me maybe 3 years before I started Mural, if I was going to be an entrepreneur, I would be like, no, I'm a COO of a public REIT and I was planning to continue to keep doing that. And so I was not one of these people who had like this eye on entrepreneurship per se. I didn't grow up in a family of entrepreneurs or anything like that. But what I will say is that because I've sat in all of these rooms in all of these years, I say to my husband all the time, it's like you're in rare air, right? So you're in rooms that not everyone that looks like us are in, and you bring to those rooms a perspective that the other people in the room may not have. And so putting those two things together, you tend to see the world a little bit differently. There are times when I have been sitting in boardrooms or sitting in meetings, and I'm like, do you literally not see me sitting here? Like you're talking about people that I am related to or that I understand, and you're talking about them as if I'm not here. I'm like scratching my hand, like I'm still, yeah, I am still. Okay. And so you see fundamentally how the capital market structures work. You see how the commercial real estate industry works. You see how retail industry works. And so when we talk about things like an affordable housing crisis and parts of the country that are underserved, it is no mistake, or it is not, the systems as they are set up today by default would result in an affordable housing gap and in certain markets being underinvested, because the way that we make decisions is so myopic and so consistent, and we, as a market, we follow each other, we follow the herd. We want to go where there are comps that we can rely on. We want to go where there are certain demographic trends within a 1, 3, 5 mile radius. We want to go where other people have built a product similar to ours, and so then we can then replicate it. And so based on that, you by default are creating this industry where you have capital A affordable housing that is being subsidized largely by our government, and we have market rate housing that is luxury, higher rent product that can be supported in a pro forma or an underwriting because the rents are high. And by default, it creates a large gap in the middle so that people who are working every day don't have a place that they can afford to live in most major MSAs throughout this country. And so as we were going through 2021 into 2022, I am COO of Cedar. We own 90 shopping centers up and down the East Coast. It is COVID. The grocery stores are open, but the retail centers are not. I have employees going up and down highways. I'm talking to police officers to get notes so the property managers can drive on the highways. We're renegotiating over 2,000 leases to accommodate COVID. There are riots going on in Philly and DC. I mean, it was just like, of all the times to be the COO of a grocery anchored REIT, it was unforgettable by large measure. But in the midst of all of that, I turned 50, and I was really thinking about not only the successes that I had had up until that point, but what are my what is my next 50 going to look like, God willing, if I last that long? And what do I want my legacy to be? And I have, to your point, I've built a lot of projects and managed a lot of teams and worked at some really amazing places. But I recognize societally that there are some gaps within our industry. And, as I got to thinking about it, I felt like, not that I'm the only person, but I am a person that is specifically poised to be able to address it, because I see kind of the larger macro picture. I also see the community societal picture, and also have built buildings and operated buildings and understand the financial metrics of real estate. And so putting all of those together, I decided to start Mural and to really take the experience of creating mixed use neighborhoods, not just buildings, but neighborhoods, and taking that experience and translating it into underinvested markets throughout the country that have not been fully capitalized in the past, utilizing my experience in forming public-private partnerships and bringing all of that to bear to really revitalize underinvested communities. And so it was a lot of different things happening all at once. I hadn't decided to do it until I decided to do it, if that makes sense. And then I, had a conversation with my husband, and he was like, that sounds like a wonderful idea. I'm behind you 1,000%. Because it's not easy to tear up a contract for us, working as the C-suite of a REIT. So I needed full familial buy-in from the whole family to be able to do it. But they've all been extremely supportive. And in May of 22, we launched.
Well, shout out to your husband. So first of all, Robin, shout out to your husband, the angel investor.
Yes, exactly.
Sweat equity induced, and all of the above.
1,000%.
I'm hearing you really talk about, like, full on community development. I'm hearing things like placemaking and walkable communities, and are these the items that you're kind of tackling with your new venture?
Yeah, definitely. So the projects we built previously, while working at the REIT were mixed use neighborhoods that had ground floor retail, placemaking, residential, office, condos, hotels, um, a live theater, jazz club, all kinds of different uses. And one of the things I saw in operating mixed use, as well as overseeing the development, but more importantly on the operations side, is how critical that ground floor plane activation is to the success of the residential. I always say when we're doing residential development and everyone is like lamenting over the gym and the business center and all of these things, the real amenity is the ground floor retail. That is what makes people want to rent there. When you think about where you want to live, you think about, is there a grocery store nearby? Are there restaurants nearby? Where are my kids' school? Is there a daycare center? Where's the bank? Where's, the conveniences of life? And so that is what makes residential even more successful, and it's what really creates neighborhood ecosystems. What's happened in most underinvested markets is the focus is on only capital A affordable housing, and there is no other ecosystem. And so all of the goods and services and the other things that are not only tax drivers, but also create community doesn't exist there. The only thing that's there is the housing. And so part of what we bring to the equation is the combination of both, the mix of uses, because it's my belief that in order to truly create generational economic and social stability in an area, you can't build just capital A affordable housing. You need a mix of income of housing. You need affordable housing. You need market rate housing that's affordable, and you need workforce housing. You need all three to make the overall ecosystem work. And then you need goods and services. And so those goods and services provide a different type of tax revenue to the community, and also provide conveniences. And you need transit. You need traveling hubs, highways, streets, as well as transit that supports those communities. And so since my background is in transit-oriented developments, it's bringing that expertise to underinvested markets and thinking about it differently through a public-private framework to help with the capitalization of it. But I submit that it takes all of that to truly revitalize a community, and to do it thoughtfully so that the culture and the history of that area is still being respected and is the catalyst for the growth, and is not ignored, and dealing with kind of the threat of gentrification and all of that. So we're kind of tackling it all simultaneously, but because we are approaching it from that ground floor retail community centric approach, it helps to resolve some of the other untangible issues that happen after the building is built.
What does retail look like in 2026? Are you seeing like smaller footprints? Are you moving away from the traditional formula of like it has to be credit or I'm not leasing it? Like
Mhm.
how do you think about that mix?
Yeah, no, it's interesting because I've always, and I kind of learned this in my federal realty days, but I've always worked from the premise that the best combination of retail is local, regional, and national combined. And so that's going to give you a range from a credit standpoint. One of the arguments that I have always made is that national tenants' credit is not all that it is cut out to be. And the biggest example of that was during COVID, which is where you saw the large national credit tenants. They were taking all the PPP money before the banks could even get out of the door. But secondly, is that they were the first ones asking for rent relief, where your mom and pops and your regionals, if they had to put a second mortgage on the home or whatever they had to do, they were paying their rent. And so when you looked at, who was actually paying rent during a national pandemic, I think people would be surprised to see how much the percentage of local and regional retailers paying their rent as opposed to the nationals who have credit. And so there's that aspect that, we think through. We also think through who are the traffic drivers, right? And in each community, having the right type of national tenants coupled with local and regional is going to be important to drive sales. So whether it's the local restaurant, whether it is a hair salon, a barber shop, the fast casual restaurants that are there, you want a mix of that. And then if we have a food desert, you need a grocer, but you need a grocer that understands how to operate well in this community. Grocers have a very small margin, so if they don't fully understand the product type, is this a market that will buy sweet potato pies or pumpkin pies when Thanksgiving comes, right? Understanding those nuances in a community is all the difference between a successful grocer and an unsuccessful grocer because their margins are so small. So to me, it's more nuanced than whether it's just national or local. I would say it depends. And I think that's where the kind of having that retail expertise of operating a lot of shopping centers over a lot of different economic cycles, right? So we've had the great financial crisis, we've had COVID, we have really high interest rates, we had really low interest rates. And then you have the financial piece of retail, and then you have the fact that retail is a human centric product type, right? It's all about the vibes. It's about, does it fit in with what is going on in the market right now? And you have to be able to adjust your merchandising to fit kind of what's going on in the market at that particular time to really have a community that is evolving with where trends were going. Not to age myself, but when I started managing retail, there were no iPhones, there was no social media, like none of that existed, right? And so you have to be able to operate retail. Retail is not a static investment. And so for some groups that treat it like it is the same as office or residential, it's not. It needs to be actively curated and managed day to day, week to week, because it evolves over time much quicker than the other retail types do.
Sticking to the retail topic, what are your thoughts on this growing sector of hospitality, the whole third space concept?
Mm-hmm.
What are your
Now,
thoughts on that?
yeah, I think it is a critical point in time right now where it is needed in a lot of communities, and a lot of it is driven because of social media and people kind of having their head down on their phones all day. There is People fundamentally have a human desire to be together. And so the third space, I think, gives people the opportunity to do that, particularly now, kind of coming out of COVID, where people are working from home more, they're more isolated than ever, people are lonely. And so, retail really can be part of the mental health exercise of getting people outside of their apartment, getting people to bump into their neighbor, to convene. And so I think the third space does that. Frankly, it provides another place for people to go and work if they're working from home, and then they can bump into other people and get to know other people. Like, I think now it's like, now that we have all these different social media mediums, we have to figure out how to interact together differently, right? How do you get back to back in the day when you would go visit your grandmother and you would just play outside till the streetlights come home, right? The third space
Mhm.
is like the adult version of that today, right? And there's still a desire for that. And I think whether it's retail or a third space, placemaking in general is really about how do you create spaces and places where people feel comfortable. They feel like this is my home, this is where I belong, because that's ultimately what people are looking for. And so how do you create real estate that solves that need? And I think a third space is one of those.
Love it. I love it. It's definitely growing across
And I
the
think
country.
that's why.
And that's why, because that desire, especially now, there's more jobs where you work from home. You don't necessarily have to be in the office from 9 to 5, 5 days
Right,
a week.
right.
That this has created, a new lane that has been, and some of them are adding like I see there's one in New York that doesn't serve alcohol,
Mm.
right? And there's some of them that have like a health bend to it. So like
Hmm.
you can see there's like an evolution that's happening within the
Yeah,
space.
yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Very cool. All right. So you were an executive at a publicly traded large organizations.
Mhm.
You're now an executive running an entrepreneurial venture. What are some of the lessons that you may have learned from corporate level that you've been able to translate to your business?
Yeah, so I think, people ask me all the time, like, how different is it to run your own company? I think particularly because my role was COO, the running of the company is very similar as far as like all that you have to wear 39,000 hats all the time. I was saying to someone the other day, as a COO, like all you hear about all day are problems. Like people don't come to you and say, "Oh my God, it's such a great day. I love working here. You can't pay me enough. And I love the selection in the break room." Like that never happens, right? As the COO, every time somebody walks across the threshold of your office, it's usually because they have some sort of a problem that needs to get fixed. And so so I'm used to like, navigating what are all of the things that are going on? How do you prioritize? How do you make sure that you are determining what's a real problem and what's a perceived problem, and then how do you solve those problems? And so as an entrepreneur we're doing huge projects with 6 people, each of us individually, I call us all Swiss Army knives. We're all doing the work of probably 10 people apiece. And so you're kind of managing the same kind of day-to-day blocking and tackling. I would say the biggest difference, frankly, is the capitalization structure. So obviously, as a REIT, you raise money through the public markets. And as a private company, you don't, right? And so I think because I fully understood, and I also sit on 3 public boards, as you mentioned, I came out of, being the COO of a REIT thinking I understand the real estate capital markets. I get it, right? And then I had my own company and realized, oh, dear Lord, this is totally different. The private market is completely different than the public market. And so the capitalization structure and how you capitalize the company and the deals and all of that is very, very different. And frankly, the networks are different, the structures are different, it's all different. And so it took me a minute to kind of figure out that piece of it. And we're still working through some of that as far as figuring out what is the best structure for Mural. And the interesting or not interesting thing about it is because we are trying to create a space in what we perceive to be a gap in the market, it's also a gap from a capital market standpoint. And what I mean by that is we're doing mixed use and we're doing mixed income. So that means within one project, we could have retail, we have residential. Within that residential, we have affordable housing, we have workforce housing, we have market rate housing. Within some institutional groups, that's four different groups within their company. And then when we're doing a covered land play, well, that's core, but then we're transitioning it into opportunistic. So which group does it go into from an investment type? So within our projects and within the phasing of our projects, we could hit 3 or 4 different property types and 2 or 3 different investment types. And the big institutional shops aren't set up like that. And so then it's like, well, how do we think about the structure of what we do versus how to fit it in with the capital? And so those are all of the things we're kind of working through right now. Candidly, we decided a year ago, over a year ago now, to try our hand at our first fund. We had some really successful meetings. We had a couple of really, really close opportunities to get our anchor investor. And there was like staffing changes with the pension funds and different things that had nothing to do with us, but just totally derailed the process. And raising a fund was a full-time job by itself. And so when that happened, where our anchor investor there was a shift within the staffing and we had to put that on hold. I literally just did not have the stomach to go through it again. So we kind of put the notion of raising our first fund on hold, and we're continuing to do deals on a deal by deal basis. I don't know if that's the best decision or not, but it's the decision that we made. And also understanding and recognizing the difference between being an owner operator and being an investment manager. And they are not necessarily the same thing. And really thinking about who do we want to be as a company and which of those lanes do we want to sit in, at least for now. So all of those are kind of lessons learned, I think, coming out of a REIT and having our own firm and really having to think through these things differently and thinking we've, really understood kind of how the capital markets work and not fully appreciating just how different raising capital for a REIT is from the private market.
I can't stress enough like how vast your experience is. I mean, from your time at Federal Realty Investment Trust, where you were managing about 7 million plus square feet, then your other role at Cedar Realty, where it was another 9 million square feet, and now here you are getting ready to break ground on a pretty gigantic project in Connecticut. You're doing some things in Queens. Like
Mm-hmm.
this is you're you're going from the investment manager role to the boots on the ground day-to-day operator, and the lessons that you bring to both of these kind of roles, I think is super fascinating. um, I guess if we think about like your trajectory, and
Mm-hmm.
even as what you mentioned, right? You think that going out and raising a closed end or open end fund might be the direction for how to like bring capital in, but then you're also noticing how the capital markets are a little bit squirrely right now, and you have to do things on a deal by deal basis.
Mm-hmm.
Does that change your thesis at all, or is it just a different way to put the capital stack together, but the thesis still holds strong?
Yeah, so we've held really strong to the thesis. I mean, the one thing that has the past 4 years have shown me is that we've tapped onto something. We've been around since May of 22, so not quite 4 years, and we've closed on two deals, and we awarded an RFP on the third. So we've closed on a deal in Jamaica, Queens. That deal with all phases complete would be about 900 units. We just closed in December of last year on 24 acres in Atlanta, Georgia, across the street from Greenbrier Mall. So we own two shopping centers there. And that deal is entitled by right to build over 1,000 units in a mixed use, mixed income neighborhood there as well. And then the third deal is the one you just mentioned in New Haven, Connecticut, which we won an RFP in partnership with Gilbane to build mixed use, mixed income housing next to and attached to New Haven Union Station. So those are the three deals that we've kind of done as Mural since we've been in business, despite this crazy, crazy capital market environment that we're in. And all three of those are public-private partnerships. And so one of the things that we've seen is the spigot has opened relative to municipalities wanting us to do work with them and figuring out ways to reinvigorate underinvested markets through public and using public-private tools. And so there is clearly a demand for this work. And so we've seen from a just in real time that from a market demand standpoint, what we are doing is what is needed and where there is a gap in the market. And we are still trying to figure out what is the right capitalization structure holistically. But each deal we have financed on a deal by deal basis based on the public private stack. And each of those are different, right? So we did public private partnerships when I was at Federal and at Cedar as well. Plus we're doing them at Mural. I'm probably now on my 14th or 15th one of these, and they're all different, like completely different. Like we bring elements of the experiences we've had from other municipalities and bringing those to bear so we can think through the ideas and how to structure it. But at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, there's not one of these things that's like another, right? Because each municipality has different tools, they have different needs, they have different budget constraints, like all of those types of things that you're working through. But the experience is transferable. And so we're utilizing that as really the leverage points to be able to get deals done. But I will not say it is easy. It's not for the faint of heart at all. But it is a place where we have a specific, unique skill set, and so that's what we're trying to kind of stick to our knitting. So if someone asks me to do industrial, I don't do industrial. We don't do, cold storage. We don't really do office. Like I've done office as part of our mixed use, and we'll do office if there is an office lease that we're building to, but we don't do office spec. And so we're trying to be very specific about what we do and do what we do and do it well. And so we're just trying to really stay in that lane.
We covered over a topic that, you mentioned earlier about portions of this business that you didn't know exist.
Hmm.
So I want to underline something you mentioned earlier about being on a corporate board.
Hmm.
We've had on a couple of excellent corporate leaders like Herman Bull's been on before.
Hmm.
We've had Craig Robinson on in previous episodes. Can you talk a little bit about, serving on a corporate board and serving in corporate leadership and that kind of experience?
Yeah, so serving on a corporate board is putting on a different hat, because as a board member, you are responsible for you have fiduciary responsibility for the investor in that company. You are not the CEO, you are not the CAO. Your job is to make sure that the investors are protected and that their investment is protected. And so you are, you are part of that company, but from a different lens. And so because I'm a sitting CEO of my own company now, and prior to that, I was a sitting COO of a REIT. Every time I walk in the boardroom, I have to like do a mental check to like switch my hat, right? Because now I'm in a different seat in this room as far as what my responsibilities are. And I think one of the things that makes a board member effective is understanding the difference between those two things. You're not there to run the company, you're there to protect the investor's interest. And sometimes you have to make sure that you are sharing your perspective despite where the group might be headed. Typically, with a board, if you look around the room, everyone there has a specific expertise and then sometimes a unique expertise. And so you're in the room for a reason. And so making sure that you're bringing the benefits of that particular expertise to bear so that everyone has the benefit of it. And candidly, sometimes boardrooms can be groupthink, like eighth grade, right? Well, I'm saying yes because he said yes. Well, if I say no, then they're going to be mad at me. Like those same dynamics happen on some level in the boardroom, and so I think it's important relative to your fiduciary responsibility that you kind of get past that, and that you're bringing your expertise to bear, you're helping and providing guidance and advice to the management team, and making sure that you're staying true to why you're in the room, which is to protect the investor.
Fantastic. So, Robin, if you could go back on campus, on the yard,
Ha!
and you could run into 21-year-old Robin, what advice would you give that young lady?
What a great question. Um, Wow. I would say that it's all going to be okay. And that even when things seem uncertain or when you don't have the confidence in yourself, to just keep believing in yourself. Because as a COO of a REIT, as I was growing up in the industry, so to speak, there were so many times when I was the youngest and I was the only female and I was the only black. And so I didn't have my voice. I would have thoughts, but I wasn't confident enough to share them. I had to grow in that confidence over years. And it took me a while to get there, to be able to have the confidence to be able to share my thoughts and opinions and really be able to, like, sit in the things that I know and sit in the things that I see. So I would tell her to hear, to listen to that voice and to act on it earlier, because it took me a while to get there. I got there eventually, but it took a while, right? And so you waste a lot of time being too scared to stand up and to speak and to share. And so I think that would be my biggest piece of advice to her.
I love it. Robin, thank you so much. This has been a masterclass in business and leadership. Thank you so much for joining us
Thank
today.
you for having me. Have a great day.
Wonderful.
Take
You
care.
Until
too.
next time.
Bye bye.
Till next
Thank
time.
you.